Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Rudolf Steiner. This is Building Stones for an Understanding of the Mystery of Golgotha, Lecture 8. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, the box below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I stand in the particular places that I do. Almost certainly, again, today is going to be the unconventional Bible study will give you a better explanation of why I did that, and I will point it out as we go along. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of Building Stones for an Understanding of the Mystery of Golgotha, Lecture 8, April 24th of 1917. It is most important for the present age and for the future of mankind to realize that our understanding of Christ Jesus and the mystery of Golgotha is not dependent upon the findings of the external history that is accepted as scientific today. In order to acquire a knowledge of Christ and the mystery of Golgotha that carries conviction and is susceptible to proof, we must rather look to other sources than those of contemporary historical investigation, even when these sources are the gospel themselves. I have often stated, and anyone who refers to the relevant literature can verify this for himself, that the most diligent, assiduous, and painstaking research has been devoted to gospel criticism or gospel exegesis during the 19th century. This gospel criticism has yielded only negative results. In fact, it has served rather to destroy and undermine our faith in the mystery of Golgotha, rather than to confirm and to substantiate it. That is because that is not the point of it, right? The point of gospel criticism is to point out that it cannot be confirmed and substantiated. That is the point of the criticism. That is why people are doing it. It is not to reinforce it, but rather to show with good reason that it is not something to be confirmed and substantiated. We know that many people today, not from a spirit of contradiction, but because on the evidence of historical investigation, they cannot do otherwise, have come to the conclusion that there is no justification on purely historical grounds for assigning the existence of Christ Jesus to the beginning of our era. This, of course, cannot be disproved, but that is of no consequence. I now propose to discuss whether it is possible to discover other sources than the historical sources which may contribute to an understanding of the mystery of Golgotha. Before answering the question, let us first examine a few facts of occult history. In tracing the development of Christianity during the early centuries of our era, we must bear in mind that it is difficult to comprehend this spiritual development unless we reinforce a purely historical inquiry with the findings of spiritual science. If we accept, purely hypothetically for the moment, the facts of spiritual scientific investigation into this period, then a very remarkable picture unfolds before us. As we review this development during the early centuries, we realize in effect that the mystery of Golgotha has been fulfilled not only once, as an isolated event on Golgotha, but in a figurative sense, a second time on the mighty panorama of history. When we study this period, truly remarkable things are disclosed. The Church of Rome has a tradition of continuity that is reflected in its church history. This history describes the founding of Christianity, the early church fathers, the post-Nicene fathers, and the later Christian philosophers, and the formulation of particular dogmas by councils and infallible popes and so on. History is seen as an unbroken chain, a uniform pattern of unchanging character. It is true that the early church fathers have been much criticized from certain angles, But on the whole, people are afraid to reject them completely, for in that case the continuity would be broken, and that is the major reason why they do not do so. Because the continuity would be broken, and then you would be forced to investigate your own beliefs. That is why. History proper begins with the Council of Constantinople in 869, of which I have already spoken. So history proper begins in 869 AD. Tell that to the Sumerians. As I have said, history is represented as an unbroken chain, a continuous process. But if a radical gap is anywhere to be found in an apparently continuous process, then it is here. One can hardly imagine a greater contrast than the contrast between the spirit of the early church fathers and that of the post-Nicene fathers and conciliar decrees. There is a radical difference, which is equally radically concealed, because it is in the interest of the church to conceal it. Again, yes. For this reason, it has been possible to keep the faithful today in ignorance of what took place in the first centuries of the Christian era. Today, for example, there is no clear and reliable evidence, even from leading scholars, of how the gnosis came to be suppressed. We are equally in the dark about the aims and intentions of men such as Clement of Alexandria, his pupil Origen, and others. Note 1. We're going to pop out Note 1. Clement of Alexandria, 301 to 232 BC, was head of the Catechetical School of Alexandria, a training school for catechumens. In the conflict between pistis, faith, and gnosis, knowledge, he favored the latter, and was close to the Gnostics in that he supported Platonism and the allegorical interpretation of the scriptures. He believed in the idea of the disciplina arcani. Wait, hold on, no. No. The allegorical interpretation of the scriptures, you cannot put that on him, right? If Clement of Alexandria lived from 301 to 232 BC, there is almost 0% chance that he had any knowledge of any of the scriptures, including the Old Testament. And so to say that he supported the allegorical interpretation of the scriptures is reading something into it that he was completely unaware of. Plato, yeah, he probably knew Plato, but the scriptures, no, he did not. Especially the New Testament, they wouldn't come around for another 400 years. He believed in the idea of the disciplina arcani, the withholding of higher knowledge from those unfitted to receive it, which was common to all ancient mystery teachings. Origen, AD 186 to 253, became head of the Catechetical School, nurtured in Neoplatonism through the influence of Ammonius Saccas, adjudged to be a heretic by the Fifth Ecumenical Council. He accepted the theory of pre-existence, free will, and the necessity of grace. He also used symbol and allegory in his exegesis. He wrote commentaries on nearly every work in Scripture. His crowning work was Contra Celsum, who attacked Christianity on moral and intellectual grounds. Book 6 of Eusebius, Ecclesiastical History, is devoted to him. See also Appendix 1 in the preceptive commentary of A.P. Shepard and Mildred Robertson Nichol in The Redemption of Thinking, Hodder and Stoughton. Alright, including Tertullian. Alright, let's back up. We are equally in the dark about the aims and intentions of such men as Clement of Alexandria, his pupil Origen, and others, including Tertullian, because such fragmentary information as we possess is of doubtful provenance and is derived, for the most part, from the writings of their opponents. For this reason, and because the most fantastic theories have been built on this fragmentary information, it is impossible to arrive at a reliable picture of the Church Fathers. In order to have a clear understanding of this problem, we must turn our attention for a moment to the causes of this indefiniteness, to all that has happened to the mystery of Golgotha could take place a second time in history. At the time of the Mystery of Golgotha, the ancient pagan cults and mysteries were widespread, and they were of such importance that a figure such as Julian the Apostate was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, and a long succession of Roman emperors also received initiation, though of a peculiar kind. Furthermore, everything connected with the ancient pagan cults still survived, but these facts are usually dismissed today in a few words by contemporary historians. The events of that early period are portrayed in a very superficial manner, but this superficial portrayal may provide a sufficient justification in the eyes of many for speaking of a second Mystery of Golgotha. But people have not the slightest understanding of the inner meaning of those events. From an external point of view, one can say that in the early Christian centuries, pagan temples, with their statues of a splendor and magnificence which are inconceivable today, were scattered over wide areas. And they are not inconceivable, they are just not executed. Right? We can conceive of them, and we do have people who are still sculptors. We even have people who are producing splendor and magnificence, but it is the dedication to the Christianity that is their problem here, right? Or even the pagans. We have people doing works, but nowadays it is less realistic for way too many of them. But there are still people who are doing them. There are still people who are shaping marble in magnificent ways. You should definitely investigate that if you do not believe that. These images of the gods, even into their formalistic details, were a symbolic representation of all that had lived in the ancient mysteries. Not only was there not a town or locality without abundant representations of symbolic art forms, but in the fields where peasants cultivated their crops were to be found isolated shrines, each with its statue of a god. And they never undertook agricultural work without first putting themselves in touch with those forces which they believed streamed down from the universe through the agency of the magic powers which resided in these images. Now, I do not hold that any images hold any power. Tools are tools. They are useful, but they do nothing by themselves. You can project your energy to an image, and there might be an entity attached that will feed off of that energy. But the image itself has nothing. The Roman emperors, with the support of bishops and priests, were concerned to destroy utterly these temples and shrines together with their images. We can follow this work of iconoclasm up to the time of the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. Countless edicts were promulgated ordering the ruthless destruction of these temples and shrines. During these centuries, a wave of iconoclasm swept over the world that was unprecedented in the history of mankind. Unprecedented because of the extent of the systemic destruction. Note 2. So let's go ahead and pop that out. The systemic destruction of pagan temples began under Constantine. Out of expediency, the emperors remained neutral in the conflict between Christian and pagan cults. But the Christian monks not only incited the populace to pillage, but were themselves the first to burn and pillage temples and to ransack trophies, statues, and anything of value. It was during the outburst of iconoclasm that the famous library in the Temple of Serapis was destroyed in AD 391. I am sure it was destroyed. Up to the time when Saint Benedict, with his own hands and the support of his workmen, leveled the Temple of Apollo on Monte Cassino in order to found a monastery dedicated to the service of the Benedictine order on this site, and up to the time of the Emperor Justinian, it was one of the foremost duties of the Roman emperors, who, since Constantine had been converted to Christianity, to eradicate all traces of paganism. Edicts were promulgated whose apparent purpose was to arrest this work of destruction, but in reading them one receives a strange impression. One emperor, for example, issued an edict declaring that all the pagan temples should not be destroyed immediately for fear of inflaming the populace. The work of destruction should rather be carried out gradually, for the people would then accept it without demur. That is why we celebrate both Christmas, and Easter. All the terrible measures associated with this work of destruction are very often glossed over like so many other things, and we talk about that quite a bit, how Christianity was spread as the sword. But this is a mistake. Whenever truth is in any way obscured, the path leading to Christ Jesus is also obscured and cannot be found. Since I have already spoken of this earnest love of truth, allow me to refer to a small incident which occurred in my early childhood and which I shall never forget. Such things are most revealing. Unless we willfully blind ourselves, we learn from the history of the Roman emperors that Constantine was not precisely a model of virtue. Otherwise, he would not have accused his own stepson, without any justification, of illicit relations with his own mother. The accusation was a pure fabrication, in order to find a pretext for murder. Constantine first had his stepson murdered, and on this trumped-up charge, and then the stepmother. These were simply routine acts with Constantine. Since, however, the church was deeply indebted to him, official church history is ashamed to portray him in his true colors. Talk to me about Solomon. With your permission, I should like to read a passage from my school textbook on the history of religion which refers to Constantine. Constantine showed himself to be a true son of the church, even in his private life. And I have already given you an example of this. Though often reproached for his irascibility and ambition, one must remember that the faith is not a guarantee against every moral lapse, and that Christianity could not manifest its redemptive power in him, because, to the end of his life, he never partook of the sacrament. Now, examples of this kind of whitewash are a commonplace. They demonstrate how seldom history displays a love of truth, and much the same applies to recent history. Here we find other distortions, but we fail to detect them because of other interests occupy our attention. I said, talk to me about Solomon, but you can very well talk to me about David too, or Abraham, or Jacob. Any of those have been greatly misrepresented in Sunday school. When we read the account of these imperial edicts relating to the destruction of the pagan temples, we are also informed that the Roman empires expressly rejected animal sacrifice and similar practices, which are alleged to have taken place in the temples. Now, I do not intend to criticize or to gloss over anything, but simply to state the facts. We must remember that opposition to animal sacrifice, from the entrails of which future events are said to have been predicted, was in fact a decadent form of sacrifice. It was not the trifling matter that history often suggests, but a profound science, different in character from that of today. The object of animal sacrifice, and it is difficult to speak of these practices today because we find them so revolting that we can only refer to them in general terms, was to stimulate powers which, at the time, could not be attained directly because the epoch of the old clairvoyance was past. And again, that is not necessarily true. You can believe that something is past and it not necessarily be. I am on a path. I talk all the time about the spiritual path I am on, and you can have direct revelation come to you. It's not dead, and it never has been. We went away from it. It didn't go away from us. Animal sacrifice, in no uncertain terms, is wrong. Every single time that it has ever occurred, it has been wrong. And there is nothing that will ever redeem that fact. Attempts were made within certain circles of the pagan priesthood to revive the old clairvoyant powers. This was one of the methods employed. A more satisfactory method of awakening the ancient atavistic clairvoyance in order to recapture the spirit of primeval times was to revive the particular form of sacrifice practiced in the Mithras mysteries and in the most spiritual form known to the mysteries at that time. In the priestly mysteries of Egypt and in Egyptian temples, far more brutal and bloodthirsty practices were carried out. When we study the Mithras mysteries by occult means, we realize that they were a means to gain insight into the secrets of the forces operating in the universe through sacrificial rites that were totally different in character from what we understand by sacrificial rites today. In fact, they yielded a far deeper insight into the secrets of nature than the modern practice of autopsy, which only leads to a superficial knowledge. Those who performed these sacrificial rites in the correct way were able to perceive clairvoyantly certain forces which are present in the hidden depths of nature. And for this reason, the real motives for these ritual sacrifices were kept secret, and only those who were adequately prepared were permitted to have knowledge of them. And again, I emphasize, animal sacrifice is wrong in every account. And you can eat them, that is fine. You should give thanks for that. You should not be doing it to cast and see into the future, and you should definitely not be doing it for redemption. Now, when we look into the origin of the Mithras mysteries, we find that they date back to the third post-Atlantean epoch, and so they were already decadent at the time of which we are speaking. In their purer form, they were suited to the third post-Atlantean epoch only. They had reached their high point in this epoch. Through the performance of particular rites, they had the power, albeit in a mysterious and somewhat dangerous way, to penetrate deeply into the secrets of nature. The priest performed certain rites in the presence of the neophyte, by which he was enabled to decompound natural substances, in example, to resolve them into their constituent parts, in order thereby to arrive at an understanding of the processes of nature. Through the manner in which the fire and water and the organisms interacted on each other, and through the manner in which they reacted upon the neophyte who took part in the sacrifice, a special path was opened up, which enabled him to attain to a self-knowledge that reached down to the very fibers of his being, and thereby arrive at an understanding of the universe. That is entirely possible without killing anything. Except the ego. You have to kill the ego. By participating in these sacrificial rites, man learned to see himself in a new light. But this knowledge made considerable allowance for man's weakness. Self-knowledge is extremely difficult to acquire, and these sacrificial rites were intended to facilitate such knowledge and enabled him to feel and experience his inner life more intensely than through intellectual or conceptual processes. He, therefore, strove for a self-knowledge that penetrated into his physical organism, a self-knowledge that can be seen in the souls of the great artists of antiquity, who, to a certain extent, owed their sense of form to an instinctive feeling for the forms and movements of nature which they experienced in their own organism. As we look back into the history of art, we find there was a time when the artist never dreamt of working from models. Any suggestion of working from the model would have been unthinkable. We've become increasingly aware that the artist portrayed his visual imaginations in concrete form. Visual imagination is virtually a thing of the past. We hardly dare mention it because words are inadequate to give any real indication of what we mean by it. It is incredible how much times have changed. I do not know that this is true, right? We find there was a time when the artist never dreamt of working for models. I don't think that that's a thing. I really don't. I don't know of a single point in time in which art was completely disengaged from the physical, right? There are times where, like Pablo Picasso, for instance, and you can make the argument that Picasso was not grounded in reality, but even he used models. You can make the arguments that it became sacrilegious to make the image of something, but that was regional, right? That was the morality of the particular peoples and not necessarily the ethics of the entire world. And so, I don't know that this is true, right? I don't know the entirety of art history, right? I took that in 9th grade and it was not an extensive class. But there are cave-dwelling pictures where people painted pictures of horses and cows and rhinoceroses, and those are models, right? They are taking something that exists and making an image out of it. So, yeah. Now, the Eleusinian mysteries were a direct continuation of the Mithras mysteries, which were widely diffused at the time of the Mystery of Golgotha. but at the same time they represented a totally different aspect. Now, it is important to note here that we do not have full records of either the Mithras mysteries or the Eleusinian mysteries. I do believe that there are some fragments of the Eleusinian, but I don't know that there is even really fragments of Mithras. But I haven't done an intensive study of either of those. I'm not an expert, but I don't know that they were necessarily linked, right? I don't know that we have evidence of that. We might. If you know, let me know. Whilst the Mithras mysteries emphasize the attainment of self-knowledge through the physical organism, the Eleusinian mysteries were quite different from those of the Mithras mysteries. In the latter, a neophyte was thrust deeply into himself. In the Eleusinian mysteries, his soul was liberated from the body, so that he could experience outside the body the hidden impulses of the creative activity of nature and the spirit. Now, if we ask what man learned from these mysteries, from the Mithras mysteries, which were already decadent, and from the Eleusinian mysteries that had reached their high point towards the 4th century BC, if we ask what benefit man derived from these mysteries, then the answer is found in the well-known injunction of the Delphic oracle, know thyself. Initiation was directed to the attainment of self-knowledge along two different paths. First, self-knowledge through being thrust inwards so that the astral and etheric bodies were condensed, so to speak, and through the impact of the psychic on the physical, man realized. Now you perceive yourself for what you are. You have attained self-awareness. Such was the legacy of the Mithras mysteries. In the Eleusinian mysteries, on the other hand, he attained to a self-knowledge through the liberation of the soul from the body, by means of the various rites which cannot be described in detail here, because you don't have them. The soul thus came in contact with the secret power of the sun, with solar impulses irradiating the earth, and with the forces of the moon impulse streaming into the earth, with the forces of stellar impulses and the impulses of the individual elemental forces, the warmth, air and fire forces, and so on. The external elements streamed through a man's soul, which had been withdrawn from the body, and this encounter with the external forces he attained self-knowledge. Those who were aware of the real meaning of the mystery teachings knew that man could attain to all kinds of psychic experiences outside the body, but he was unable to grasp concretely the idea of the ego. Outside the mysteries of the idea of the ego was a purely abstract concept at that time. Man could experience other aspects of the psychic and spiritual life, but the ego had to be nurtured through mystery training and needed a powerful stimulus. This was the aim of the mysteries and was known to the initiates. Now, as you know, there occurred at this time a kind of fusion between evolving Christianity and the Roman Empire. I have already described how this arose and how, because of this fusion, the Church was anxious to suppress, as far as possible, those rites I have just described to you, to efface all traces of the past and to conceal from all posterity all knowledge of the mystery practices which, over the centuries, had sought to bring man, whether in the body or outside the body, in touch with those spiritual forces which help him to develop his ego-consciousness. If we wish to make a more detailed study of the evolution of Christianity, we must consider not only the development of dogma, but especially the development of ancient cults from certain points of view. This is of far greater importance than the evolution of dogma, for dogmas are a source of controversy, and like the phoenix, they arise again from their own ashes. However much we may imagine that they have been eradicated, there is always some crank who comes along and revives the old prejudices. Cults are far easier to eradicate, and these ancient cults, which in a certain sense were the external signs and symbols of the mystery practices, were suppressed, so that it would be impossible to discover from the survival of ancient rites the methods by which man sought to come in touch with the divine spiritual forces. In order to get to the bottom of the matter, we must take a look at the chief sacrament of the Church of Rome, the sacrifice of the Mass, What is the inner significance of the Catholic Mass? To harvest your energy for some entities that may or may not be directly aligned with your intentions. In reality, the Mass and all that is related to it is a continuation and development of the Mithras mysteries. Yes, the death cult. Right? If it is as they explain, right, that the Mithras, I don't know. So if they, as they explain, if Mithras was involved with the animal sacrifices and the Eleusinians were involved with the self-discovery, then yes, the Catholics are indeed in alignment with the Mithras mysteries. Blended to some extent with the Eleusinian mysteries. The sacrifice of the Mass and many of the related ceremonies is simply a further development of the ancient cults. The original ritual has been somewhat transformed. The sanguinary character which the Mithras mysteries had assumed has been modified, but we cannot fail to note many similarities in the spirit of these two cults, especially if we appreciate certain details. For example, before receiving the host, the priest, as well as the communicant, must fast for a certain period. This detail is more important for the understanding of the mystery in question than many of the issues that were so fiercely debated in the Middle Ages. And if the priest, as may well happen, neglects the order to fast before celebrating the Eucharist, then the communion loses its meaning and the effect it should have. Fasting is important, it is, but I don't know that it is in this manner, right? Not for the external thing. It prepares you to receive the spiritual. That is what fasting does. I'm a big proponent of prayer, fasting, and meditation. I tell you in almost every video that that is the way to go. Indeed, its efficacy is largely lost because the communicants have not been properly instructed. It can be effective only if suitable instruction has been given to the communicant on what he should experience immediately after receiving the unbloody sacrifice of his body and blood. But you are no doubt aware of how little attention is paid to these subtleties nowadays. How little people realize that communion must be followed by an inward experience, that one should experience an inner intimation, a kind of modern renewal of that stimulation which the neophyte experienced in the Mithras mysteries. This is what really lies behind the Christian cult. An ordination was an attempt by the church to establish a kind of continuation of the ancient principle of initiation. But she forgot in many cases that initiation consisted in giving instruction in the way to respond to certain experiences, not merely learning the rituals, but understanding what was behind them. Not that I believe that there was anything good involved in the Catholic mysteries, right? Now, Julian's avowed object was to discover how the Eleusinian mysteries, into which he had been initiated, were related to the mysteries of the third post-Atlantean epoch. I wonder if he called them that. What could he learn from these mysteries? On this subject, history tells us little. If we were to embark upon a serious study of how men, such as Clement of Alexandria, his pupil Origen, Tertullian, and even Irenaeus, note 3, let's go ahead and look at that. Irenaeus, born in Asia, heard St. Polycarp in his youth. The date of his death is unknown. His chief work was Adversius Heresies, in circa 179, an attack upon the Gnostics and the principal heresies. And even Irenaeus, to say nothing of these still earlier fathers, derive in part from the pagan principle of initiation and came to Christianity in their own way. If we were to enter into the minds of these great souls, we should find that their concepts and ideas were informed by an inner vitality peculiar to them alone, that an entirely different spirit dwelt in them from that which was later reflected on the church. If we wish to understand the mystery of Golgotha, we must catch something of the spirit of these early fathers. Now, in relation to the great cultural manifestations, men are fast asleep, and I mean this literally. They see the world as if in a dream, and we can observe this at the present time. I have often spoke to you of Hermann Grimm, note 4. Let's go ahead and pop that out. Hermann Grimm, 1828 to 1901, son of Wilhelm Grimm, who, with his brother Jakob, collected and edited nursery and household tales. Hermann was an art historian who wrote works on Goethe, Dante, Shakespeare, Raphael, and Michelangelo. And I must confess that when I speak of him today, I am a different person from the person who spoke of him some 4 or 5 years ago. After nearly 3 years of war, the decades before the war and the years immediately preceding the war seem like a golden age. And you think them 3 years or something. Wait just a couple more. All that has happened in those years seems centuries ago. Things have changed so much that one has the feeling that time has been infinitely prolonged. And in like manner, the most important things pass unnoticed because mankind is asleep to them. If today we try to grasp the ideas of ancient writers with the ordinary method of understanding, conventional academic teachers, of course, understand everything that has been transmitted to posterity. But if one is not one of those enlightened mortals, one may come to the conclusion that it is impossible to understand ancient Greek philosophers unless one has recourse to occult knowledge. They speak a different language. The language in which they communicate their ideas is different from that of normal communication. And this applies to Plato. Hebel, let's go ahead and pop out note 5. Hebel, 1813 to 63, poet and dramatist. Tragedy, according to Hebel, arises out of conflict. Innovators, leaders of new movements, men of original mind, representatives of new principles, though they may lead to the amelioration of society, are doomed to destruction. This was the tragedy of Christ. The first and last representative of a movement, he declared, is either tragic or comic. Hebel was aware of this, and in his diary he sketched an outline of a dramatic composition which depicted the reincarnated Plato as a grammar school pupil who had read Plato with his master, but was unable to cope with Plato, although he himself was the reincarnation of the philosopher. Hebel wanted to dramatize this idea, but never carried it out. Hebel therefore felt that even Plato could not be readily understood. One needed further preparation. Understanding in the sense of the accurate grasping of ideas first began with Aristotle in the 4th century BC. Philosophy before Aristotle is incomprehensible by normal human standards. This explains the many commentaries on Aristotle, for while on the one hand he was perfectly intelligible, on the other hand, in the formation of certain concepts, we have not advanced beyond Aristotle because in respect he belongs to his age. It is impossible to adopt the thought forms of another epoch. That is tantamount to asking a man of 56 to become 26 again, in order to relive for a quarter of an hour his experiences as a man of 26. A certain mode of thinking is only valid for a particular epoch, and the peculiarity attaching to the thinking of a particular epoch is merely repeated time and time again. It is interesting to note how Aristotle dominated the thinking of the Middle Ages and how his philosophy was revived again by Franz Brentano, and precisely at this moment in time. All right, this is note 6. Franz Brentano, 1838 to 1917, an Austrian philosopher, ordained 1864, but was unable to accept the doctrine of papal infallibility and relinquished his clerical status. Professor of philosophy at Würzburg, 1872, and taught at the University of Vienna, 1874 to 95. Aristoteles and Sein Weltanschauung, 1911, was a reassessment of Aristotelian philosophy. Brentano attempted to revive Aristotle's logic and psychology from the standpoint of empiricism. Brentano believed the existence of a personal and immortal soul. C. D. Cross, Franz Brentano, 1919, and H. O. Eaton, The Austrian Philosophy of Values, 1930. Franz Brentano, and precisely at this moment in time. In 1911, Brentano wrote an excellent book on Aristotle in which he elaborated those ideas and concepts that he wished to bring to the attention of our present epoch. It is a curious symptom of the karma of our age that Brentano should have written at this precise moment of time a comprehensive study of Aristotle, which should be read by all who value a certain kind of thinking. And let me add in addition that the book is eminently readable. Now, it was the fate of Aristotle's writings to have been mutilated, not by Christianity but by the Church, though not directly, so that essential parts of his work are missing. That happened with more than just Aristotle's writings. Consequently, these lacunae must be supplemented by occult means. The most important omissions refer to the human soul. And in connection with Aristotle, I now come to the question posed by all today. How can I find, by means of inner soul experiences, a sure way to open myself to the mystery of Golgotha? How can I direct towards this end the practice of meditation described in my writings, knowledge of the higher worlds, and elsewhere? To a certain extent, Aristotle attempted, on his own initiative, to awaken within himself the inner experiences which those who pose this question must attempt to undertake. I have outlined these methods, right? We talk about this all of the time. Prayer, fasting, and meditation, the direction of the energies. Check out the Infinite Integrations playlist. But according to the commentators, whenever Aristotle is on the point of describing his method of meditation, he breaks off and is silent. Yeah. It is not that he did not describe his technique, but that the later transcripts failed to record it, so that it was never transmitted to posterity. Aristotle had already embarked upon a specific path, the path of mysticism. He strove to find within his soul that which gives certainty to the soul's immortality. Now, if a man honestly and sincerely practices meditation for a time, he will unquestionably attain the inner experience of the immortality of the soul because he opens the doors to the immortal within him. Agreed. Aristotle never doubted for a moment that it is possible to experience within ourselves something which proclaims, I now feel something within me that is independent of the body, and which is unrelated to the death of the body, that is the soul, the individualized piece of God that is you. But he goes further. He strove to develop this deep inner experience, which we know, when we become conscious of it, is connected with the body. He experienced quite definitely, but the passage has been mutilated or bowdlerized, that inner solitude which must be felt by all who wish to arrive at an understanding of the mystery of Golgotha. Mystical experience inevitably leads to solitude. That is true. And when this feeling of solitude overwhelms us, we ask, what have I forsaken that I have become so lonely? We shall be obliged to answer, I have forsaken my father, mother, brothers, and sisters. I have forsworn all the vanities of the world. I am emotionally detached from them. And that again is true. In large part, right? Now, I haven't abandoned my wife, even though she is still a Christian, and we differ on that. We don't agree, and that is fine. I believe that she is going to come to my understanding. I just know my wife, but even if she doesn't, it will still be fine. But I have separated myself from most of the world, right? A large chunk of the world believes either in Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, and I am diametrically opposed to the foundational principles espoused by these things, right? Not that you can't find God in them, because God will find you where you are, but that God is not intrinsically involved in them. This inner experience can be felt by everyone. It can be systemically developed. In this feeling of solitude, we come to realize that we have something within us that transcends death, something that pertains to the ego alone and is unrelated to the external world. Aristotle, too, realized that our contact with the external world is mediated through the physical organs. It is possible for man to experience himself in other ways, but the organs of the body are indispensable in order to experience the external world. Hence, the feeling of solitude that overtakes us. And Aristotle realized, as everyone who follows in his steps must realize, that he had experienced his immortal soul, which death cannot destroy. He was no longer attached to the finite and transient. I am henceforth alone with myself, he said, but my idea of more immortality is limited. I realize that after death I shall know utter solitude, that through all eternity I shall be faced with the good and evil deeds that I have perpetrated in life, and these will always be before my eyes, and this is all I can attain by my own efforts. I wish to gain a deeper insight into the spiritual world. I cannot rely on my own efforts alone. Either I must receive initiation or be instructed by initiates. And in part, that is true, right? You can, with nothing else, do prayer, fasting, and meditation and discover the things that I talk about for yourself. But unless somebody confirms that for you, you have doubts. That is in large part what I am here for, right? For when you do the experiential part, when you go for your own experience, you can come back to my relaying of my experience as confirmation of the things you experience. Now, that can be with the predetermined notion that it will happen, or it can be completely independent of me. I have zero doubt that some people will find the path before they find me, and they will find the confirmation of the same things that I talk about in me. And so I am relaying them, fully knowing that some people will go in with the preconceived notion and some people won't. It is the fact that some people won't that reassures me in myself. I am confident enough in my own abilities to discern, to understand that the things that I have learned are something worthy of being relayed. I have come to understand through my own experiences and the things that have been brought to fruition through the methods by which I relay that you can do these things too. But once again, I cannot give them to you. You have to have the dedication, the prayer, fasting, and meditation, the will to make it happen. I also have been initiated, right? But it is not to a club on the mortal plane. It is a spiritual experience that I have been initiated into, the Order of Melchizedek. And it's not something that I can relay. And maybe because I have been initiated, that gave me the discernment. I cannot dismiss that. But at the time of the initiation, I was not a Christian by any means. It wasn't until later that that came about. So I don't know in particular that it is the initiation that allows me to be able to say these things, but maybe. And if so, that is fine, right? I have received something extra that made me able to relate to you that something extra is real. All this could be found in Aristotle's writings, but his successors were forbidden to transmit the knowledge. And because Aristotle anticipated this possibility, he was regarded, to a certain extent, as a kind of prophet. He became the prophet of that which was not possible in his day, and which is different today from what it was in Aristotle's time. There is no need to appeal to history. We know from personal experience that times have changed. Now let us turn our attention once again to this feeling of total solitude which assails us today, to this mystical experience which is completely different from the mystical experiences usually described. People often speak of them complacently and say, God is experienced within myself. That is not, however, the full mystical experience. In full mystical experience, we experience God in total and utter solitude. Alone in the presence of God, man experiences himself, and then he must find the necessary strength and perseverance to continue in this state of isolation. And again, I am in agreement. For this experience of solitude is a potent force. If we do not allow ourselves to be oppressed by solitude, but allow it to become an active force in us, then we meet with a further experience. These things, of course, can only be described, but everyone can experience them. How many times have I told you that? We have the firm conviction that the solitude we suffer is self-created, that we have brought it upon ourselves. We create the gods in our own images. This solitude is not born with us, it is created by us. We ourselves are responsible for us. This is the second experience. And this second experience leads to the feeling that we share direct responsibility for the death of that which was born of God. When man has suffered the dark night of the soul for a sufficient length of time, the divine element in him has been slain by the all too human. This has not always been the case. Otherwise, evolution would have been impossible. There must have been a time when this feeling did not exist. That is false logic. At this moment, man begins to feel that he shares responsibility for the death of the divine within him. If time permitted, I could explain more fully the meaning of the slaying of the Son of God. Remember that mystical experience is not vague, indefinite, isolated experience. It unfolds progressively. We ourselves experience the death of Christ. And when this experience has become a powerful force in us, then, I can express it in no other way, that Christ, the risen Lord, is born in us. For the risen Lord, he who has suffered death, is first felt as an inner mystical experience, and the reason for his death is experienced in the manner already described. I can get the allegory, but I don't necessarily agree with it. I've already explained why, so I'm not going to try and dig back into that, but no. There are 3 degrees of mystical experience. To find the path leading to the sources of the mystery of Golgotha is of itself not enough. Something more must be added, something that has been grotesquely misrepresented, even concealed, at the present time. The only person who forcefully pointed out what has been concealed from mankind by the 19th century was Friedrich Nietzsche in his book on the uses and abuses of history. Y'all remind me to look that up. We have done Nietzsche, Zarathustra, but there was not a whole lot of use contained in that. Nothing is more calculated to destroy our understanding of Christ than what is called history today. And the mystery of Golgotha has never been more thoroughly misrepresented than by the objective historians of the 19th century. I am aware that anyone who criticizes the objective history of today is regarded as a fool. Call me a fool all you want. I have no wish to denigrate the painstaking philological and scholarly achievements of historical research, but however scholarly or however exact this history may be, it is a spiritual desert. It has no understanding of the things that are of vital importance to the life of man and to mankind as a whole. They are a closed book to modern history. Perhaps I may be permitted to speak from personal experience in this field, for these things have personal associations. Since my 19th year, I have been continually occupied with the study of Goethe, but I have never been tempted to write a factual history of his life or even portray him in the academic sense, for the simple reason that from the very first I felt that what mattered most was that Goethe was still a living force. The physical man, Goethe, who was born in 1749 and died in 1832, is not important. What is important is that after his death, his spirit is still alive amongst us today, not only in the Goethe literature, which is not particularly enlightened, but in the very air we breathe. The spiritual atmosphere that surrounds us today did not as yet exist in the men of antiquity. The etheric body, as you know, is separated from the soul after death as a kind of second corpse, but through the Christ impulse that informs us since the mystery of Golgotha, this etheric body is now preserved to some extent. No, the soul has always been eternal, and it always will be. It is not completely dissolved. If we believe, and I use the word belief in the sense which I defined in an earlier lecture, that Goethe is risen in an etheric body, and if we begin to meditate upon him, then his concepts and ideas become alive in us, and we describe him not as he was, but as he is today. The idea of resurrection has then become a living reality, and we believe in the resurrection. We can then say that we believe not only in ideas that belong to the past, but also in the living continuity of ideas. This is connected with a profound mystery of modern times. No matter what we may think, as long as we are imprisoned in the physical body, our thoughts cannot manifest in the right way. This does not apply to our feeling and will, but only to our thoughts and representations. Great as Goethe was, his ideas were greater than he. That they were unable to rise to greater heights was due to the limitations of his physical body. The moment they were liberated from these limitations of the body and could be developed by someone who has sympathy and understanding for them, they are transformed and acquire new life. I am referring here to the thoughts which persist to some extent in his etheric body, not to his feeling and will. Remember that the form in which ideas first arise in us is not their final form. Believe, therefore, in the resurrection of ideas. Believe this so firmly that you willingly seek union with your forefathers, not with your forefathers to whom you are linked through ties of blood, but with your spiritual forefathers, and that you will ultimately find them. They need not be Goethes. They might equally well be a Smith or a Brown. Try to fulfill the injunction of Christ. Do not cling to ties of consanguinity, but seek a spiritual relationship. Like, that is true, right? But once again, don't look to me. Take the things I am telling you and experience them yourself. You don't need anybody who has been a corporeal form to come in between. No Goethe, no Smith, no Brown, no Jesus. You don't need anybody who existed before to be an etheric spiritual being to relay these things. You can go directly to the source. Then the thought of resurrection becomes a living reality in your life, and you will believe in resurrection. It is not a question of invoking incessantly the name of the Lord. What matters is that we grasp the living spirit of Christianity, that we hold fast to the vitally important idea of resurrection as a living force. And he who in this way draws support for his inner life from the past learns that the past lives on in us. We experience in ourselves the continuity of the past, and then it is only a question of time. The moment arrives when we are aware of the presence of the Christ. Everything depends on our firm faith in the risen Christ and in the idea of resurrection, so that we can now say, we are surrounded by a world of spirit, and the resurrection has become a reality within us. And once again, the resurrection is not a necessary thing. Right? The resurrection of ideas is a tenuous thing at best, right? It is your imaginations of what they once thought. I'm not interested in necessarily bringing that back. It can be that what I am doing is that, but that is not the goal, right? I am revealing things that have been revealed to me. I am talking directly about things that I have directly experienced. I am not relying upon someone else. We do these studies so that the points are brought to light so that I can remember to talk about them in a somewhat of an order. And instead of jumping from topic to topic, because I am direct and I will hit it with one sentence and move on to a completely different topic. So that's the reason for this structure. The resurrection becoming a reality within us would more appropriately be finding the one true path for ourselves within and without ourselves, without the extra from others, right? The prime best way to find me is after you have already experienced these things and I'm the confirmation. Second to that is to take the things that I say and experience them yourself. At no point should you take the things that I say and just run with it as if it is fact, even if you have not experienced it. Don't do that. Take what I say, put it into practice, and see if you get the same experience as me. That is the point here. You may object, however, that this is pure hypothesis. So be it. Once you have had the experience of having been in touch with the thoughts of someone who has died, whose physical body has been committed to the earth, and whose thoughts live on in you, then a time comes when you say, "The thoughts that I have newly arisen in me, I owe to Christ. They can never have come so vitally alive but for the incarnation of Christ." And once again, it is a vehement disagreeal. You can come to an understanding and then find it. Right? That is what I am doing. I have the understanding and then I found it. I didn't get this understanding because I studied someone, meditated upon their works, and then said, oh, this is the resurrection of something. This was a direct revelation to me. And then I found the confirmations out in the world. It's separate from Christ. It is not because of Christ that I have these revelations. It is through my study of Christ that I fell apart from Christianity. It is through my study of the mystical that I have fallen into the mystical. It is because I know them experientially to be true. It is not because I read it somewhere. It is because I experienced it for myself. There is an inward path to the mystery of Golgotha, but one must first abandon so-called objective history, which in reality is entirely subjective because it deals with surface phenomena and ignores the spirit, and because it has been heavily edited. Many Goethe biographies have been written which set out to portray Goethe's life with maximum fidelity. In every case, the authors, of necessity, stifle something in themselves, for Goethe's way of thinking has been transformed and lives on in a different form. It is important that we should grasp Christianity in the same spirit. In short, it is possible to have a mystical experience of the mystery of Golgotha, mystical in the true sense of the word. One must not be content with abstractions. One must be prepared to suffer through the inner experiences I have already described. And now the question is raised. How can I draw near to Christ? It must be understood that we are referring to the risen Christ. If we have the patience and necessary perseverance to follow the path indicated, we can be sure of finding the Christ at the right moment. But when we find him, we must be careful not to overlook what is most important. And I would hold the contention that every time you see this, it is not talking about the man that walked on the earth. It can be imitating this or intimating the spirit of that man, but for me, every single time that you see this in this manner, substitute God for Christ and you are perfectly fine. I said in an earlier lecture that Aristotle was a prophet and that Julian the Apostate inherited something of the same prophetic gift. Owing to the form which the Eleusinian mysteries had assumed at the time, he could not discover their true meaning. If by that you mean that he couldn't discover Christ in them, then yeah, he couldn't, because that wasn't the true meaning. Right? That is some self-insertion. You assume that because he didn't come to the conclusion of which you are convinced, that means that there was not a conclusion. That's not true. I have come to a conclusion. It is not the same as what you are trying to make happen. And so it is entirely possible that he came to a conclusion and that he had a prophetic gift and that that prophetic gift gave him the conclusion. He hoped to find the answer in the Mithras mysteries. It was for this reason that Julian embarked on his Persian campaign. He wished to discover the continuity in the mystery teachings and find the connection between them. And because this was not permitted, he was assassinated. Now, the early church fathers sought to experience the Christ after the fashion of the Eleusinian mysteries. Whether we call them Gnostics or not, the true Gnostics were rejected by the church, though Clement of Alexandria could justifiably be called a Gnostic. They had a totally different relation to Christ than the later times. They were eradicated by the church, not because they were wrong. They sought to approach him through the Eleusinian mysteries and accepted him as a cosmic being. They repeatedly raised the question, how does the Logos operate purely in the spiritual world? What is the true nature of the being whom man encounters in paradise? What is the relation to Logos? Those are important questions. You should ask those questions. Such were the questions which occupied the minds of the Gnostics, questions that can only be answered by those who are familiar with the world of spiritual ideas. When we study the Eleusinian mysteries that were extirpated root and branch, it is evident that in the first centuries after the Mystery of Golgotha, the risen Christ was himself present in the mysteries in order to reform them. That is not evident. And we can truly say that Julian the Apostate had a deeper understanding of Christianity than Constantine, and that's why he separated himself from it. In the first place, Constantine had not been initiated and had only accepted Christianity in a superficial way. But Julian felt intuitively that Christ could only be found in the mysteries. It was through initiation that we must find the Christ. He would endow us with the ego, which could not be granted us at that time because we were not ready to receive it. It was a historical necessity that these mysteries should be destroyed because they did not lead to the Christ. We today must find access to Hellenism once again, but without the aid of documents. Hellenism must be revived, not of course in its original form. Otherwise, it becomes the travesty that can be seen in the aping of the Olympiad, for example. It is not a question of aping Hellenism. I am not suggesting any such thing. Hellenism must be renewed from within, and unquestionably will be renewed. We must find the path to the mysteries once again, but within ourselves, and then we shall also find the path to the Christ. Just as Christ was crucified for the first time on Golgotha, he was crucified a second time through Constantinianism. By suppressing the mysteries, Christ, as a historical reality, was crucified a second time. For those acts of vandalism which lasted for centuries destroyed not only a priceless treasures of art, but destroyed also man's experience of the spiritual world, the most important experience he could have. People had no understanding of what had been destroyed by this vandalism because they had lost all sense of values. When the temples of Jupiter and Serapis were demolished together with their statues, the mob applauded. "It is right to destroy them," they said, "for it has been foretold that when the temple of Serapis is destroyed, then the heavens will fall and the earth will be plunged in chaos." The heavens, however, have not fallen, nor has the world collapsed in chaos, despite the fact that the Roman Christians have leveled the temple to the ground. It is true that outwardly the stars have not fallen, nor has the earth been plunged into chaos. But all that man had formerly known through the experience of the sun initiation was extinguished. That majestic wisdom, more grandiose than the firmament of ancient astronomy, collapsed along with the ruins of the temple of Serapis. And this ancient wisdom, the last traces of which Julian still found in the mysteries of Eleusis, where the spiritual sun and the spiritual moon had been revealed to him, this wisdom was lost forever. See the Infinite Integrations playlist for more on the sun and the moon. All that the men of ancient times experienced in the Mithras mysteries and Egyptian mysteries, when, through sacrificial worship, they relived inwardly the mysteries of the moon and the earth, as they are enacted in man himself, when he came to self-knowledge through the inner compression of his soul, all this has collapsed in chaos. Spiritually, however, the heavens had fallen and the earth was plunged in chaos, for what was lost in the course of those centuries is comparable to the loss that we should suffer if we were suddenly bereft of our senses, when we would know neither the heavens above nor the earth beneath our feet. That is almost certainly, like this prophecy, is almost certainly tied to the 12,000-year disaster cycle, something that you may want to look up if you were unaware of what it is. The loss of the ancient world is not the trivial episode recorded in history, but it has far deeper implications. We must believe in the resurrection, even if we are unwilling to believe that what has disappeared is lost forever. This demands that we should be resolute in thought and have the courage of our convictions. We realize this imperative need today for the Christ impulse, to which I have so often referred to in these lectures. Through karmic necessity, a necessity from a certain standpoint only, man has for centuries been destined to live a life that was empty and purposeless, to live in a spiritual vacuum so that through a strong inner urge for freedom, he could find the Christ again and in the right way. And that is why we had Christianity as a dominant force for so long, so that you could fall away from it. Right, that's what it's saying here. There was a karmic necessity that life would be empty and purposeless, and that is after Christ. Really? But he must first rid himself of that self-complacency from which he so often suffers at the present time. Now, I believe that that is true, right? That we have been empty and purposeless for a long time, but I believe that it is because of the control systems and not despite it, right? Sometimes this self-complacency assumes most remarkable forms. In the 80s, a Benedictine father, Nauer, gave a course of lectures in Vienna on the Stoics. I should like to read you a passage from one of these lectures. The leading representatives of the Stoic school of philosophy were Zeno, 342 to 270, Cleanthes, 331 to 232, and Chrysippus, 282 to 209. That is all BC dates. And school therefore flourished several centuries before the Mystery of Golgotha. This is what Nauer says. In conclusion, I should like to say in defense of the Stoics that they strove for a League of Nations, embracing the whole of mankind, which would end war and racial hatred. I need hardly say that in this respect the Stoics rose superior to the often inhuman prejudices of their time, and even of later generations. A League of Nations? I had to read the lecture again. Could it be that my ears had deceived me when I heard Woodrow Wilson and other statesmen talking of a League of Nations? For here was the voice of the Stoics, but they said it far better because they had the power of the mysteries behind them. The inner power which inspired their discourses is now lost, leaving but the shell behind. Only those historians who stand a little apart from the normal species of historian can sometimes see historical events in a new and different light. Now, it is my understanding that the Stoics do not believe in spiritualism in the way that I do, and so I do not endorse Stoicism, although many of their precepts are quite useful. And Nauer continued. I withdraw nothing of what I said recently about Immanuel Kant, but it is nonetheless remarkable that a capable philosopher such as Nauer should have said the following about the Stoa in the 80s. Amongst the more recent philosophers, he is referring to the League of Nations idea of the Stoa, no less a person than Kant has revived this idea and declared it to be a feasible proposition in his treatise on perpetual peace, a philosophical outline, a work that has not received the recognition it deserves. The fundamental idea of Kant is both sound and practicable. He shows the eternal peace must become a reality when the great powers introduce a genuinely representative system. And that has not been enacted, right? We have a representative system, but it has not come out of this, right? We are not really as representative as we could be. Our republic has several flaws, right? The two-party system being the major one. But this is a possibility if there is a genuine representative system, but what is most likely going to happen is that there is still going to be contention. And so eternal peace is not going to be a thing. In Kant, this idea is considerably emasculated, but today it has been still more emasculated, so that it is a shadow of its former self. And this nebulous conception is now graced with the name the New Orientation, or the New World Order. And Nauer continues. Under such a system, the wealthy and property classes and the professional classes, who are the chief victims of war, will have the right to decide issues of war and peaces. Our constitutions, which are modeled on that of England, are not genuine representative systems in Kant's opinion. They are dominated by party prejudice and sectional interest, which are promoted to an electoral system that is based, for the most part, on statistical calculations and the counting of heads. The crux of Kant's argument is this: international law must be based upon a federation of independent states which have wide powers of autonomy. Which, yes, it would be ideal, right? If it was possible that every single state could exist in its own place, that would be great. But it is an impossibility, right? The remarkable amount of freedom that is evidenced by us today is only so because of the amalgamation of states that we have. Our republic, the 50 states that we have and the few territories that we claim, acting as one unit, preserves the ability for other places to exist in a smaller state, right? The European Union tried a pale imitation of what we do here, but it is only through our strength in this republic that they could even try. If it was not for this republic, shortly after these lectures, the world would have indeed been amalgamated into one state. Is this the voice of Kant or the voice of the new orientation? Kant argues his case more vigorously. It is more firmly grounded. I do not propose to read to you what follows, otherwise the worthy Kant would incur the displeasure of the censor. What I have been discussing was the subject of a book by the American author Brooke Adams. Note 7. Brooke Adams, 1848 to 1927, also wrote The Dream and the Reality, 1917, predicted that by the mid-20th century the two great powers in the world would be America and Russia. American prosperity would contribute to the decay of American democracy because great wealth exercises power without responsibility. And what do you know? He was not entirely wrong, right? We use democratic systems, but we are not a democracy. That is an important distinction that some people seem to forget. But he is not entirely wrong. The two great powers of the 20th century did indeed rise to be America and Russia. Shortly after this, right, up to, like if he wrote this in 1917, that was just prior to the Second World War, where that actually became a thing. The communist bloc that became Soviet Russia and the American prosperity would contribute to the death of the American democracy. Yeah, we can see that happening right now. Now, I hold that this current state of affairs is a deliberate, intentional deconstruction of our prosperity. I firmly hold that and can defend that the current administration is a continuation of that deliberate plan, and that plan was sidetracked quite briefly between the years of 2016 and 2020, and you can draw your own conclusions from that. By the American author Brooke Adams, The Law of Civilization and Decay. A study of the importance of evolutionary theory in human history. Brooke Adams tried to account for the continual revival of old institutions and forms of life by certain peoples. For example, the revival of the Roman Empire by the Teutonic peoples. Surveying the present epoch, he finds many nations who have affinity with the Roman Empire, but no indications of the people who will renew it. Certainly not the American people, and in this he was perfectly right. The regenerative power will not come from without, it must come from within through the quickening of the spirit. It must spring from the soul and will only be possible when we grasp the Christ impulse in all its living power. All these empty phrases one hears on every hand apply to the past and not to the present or future. All this empty talk with its everlasting refrain. Yes, the old proverb is true, Minerva's owl can only spread her wings in the twilight was valid for ancient times. And to this we reply, when nations had grown old, they established schools of philosophy. They looked back in spirit to what they owed to instinct. Things will be different in the future, for this instinct will no longer exist. The spirit itself must become instinct, and from out of the spirit, new creative possibilities must arise. Reflect upon these words, for they are of momentous importance. Out of the spirit of new creative possibilities will arise. The power of the spirit must work unconsciously within you, and this depends upon the idea of resurrection. That which has been crucified must arise again. This will not come to pass by passively waiting on events, but by quickening the spiritual forces within us, by quickening the creative power of the Spirit itself. This is what I wish to say on the subject of the mystery of Golgotha at this particular juncture in time. And that is going to wrap us up on 8. I believe that we have 2 more lectures. I'm pretty sure there were 10, but it might be 8 and I might be done. Regardless, I believe that I have expounded in the points in which I hold contention well enough. I am on a spiritual path, and I am attempting to dispense that spiritual path to as many people as I can, because I do believe that we are at the point in time where we need to be looking back. We need to be creating these schools of philosophy that operate outside of the current paradigm of peer review, right? The current paradigm of peer review is a control device just as much as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is. It is keeping us from the true discovery of things which are. There is a subtle field. There is the ability to manipulate that subtle field inherent within you. It is something that you have to develop, the same way that you would have to develop throwing a ball or carving or painting. You have to spend the time and the intentionality to make it promulgate to its fullest extent. You are the author of where we are going in the future. Just as much as I am, just as much as every other person, I don't believe that there is a singular person who is going to be responsible for this. I am out here endeavoring to be myself the example, but I am sure there are other examples of the same thing. Anything I can do, you can do better. You can do everything better than I. I like that. I'm emphasizing that for a reason, right? I am but a mere worm. I am merely munching my way through the things that are presented in front of me. I am using the gifts that were given to me through direct revelation to discern between true and false. I think that the major flaw in the logic of this series of lectures is the emphasis that it has to be centered around Christ. I understand the desire and even the need for that to happen, right? At this point in time, the old ways were indeed falling, right? We have, at this point, this is 1917-ish, right? They were 1917. It is, 300 years after the Reformation? This is just after the First World War, a little while after the American Civil War, and just before the Second World War. We have just invented flight, and we are by no means masters of it yet. The jet engine is yet to come. Radar, telecommunications, still in the future. We are evolving into something scientific. And at this point in time, in order to dispense from the control system that was Christianity, which held men back from achieving these things, it was necessary, and by necessary that is a very loose interpretation of that word, it was necessary to separate ourselves from the spiritual in order to create flight, to come up with the various wonders that we live with today. But it is now time, once again, to assume the mantle of spirituality, devoid of the control systems. And so, to me, the major logic flaw here is the necessity of tying it back to Christianity. It is not intrinsic that you have to be a Christian to find a spiritual path. God will find you where you are. God found me in a parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon. I have a whole video where I created a written word poem out of that. That was a real thing that happened to me. I really went searching for an altar that I could kneel in front of and say a prayer to God to save my home. My entire world was falling apart. I was shortly about to become homeless. Me and my children and my wife were we were just beginning to go through a period of great distress. God found me there, crying in a parking lot in front of a church who I could not get in. After driving around my entire town trying to find a church that I could get in, and I couldn't. Couldn't find a single soul. And so I sat under an oak tree and I cried my eyes out, and God found me there. And he set me on this path in a very real way. I am a completely different person than I was in 2017 when that happened to me. Where I am at now, 7 years later, is remarkable. We're about to begin the new harmonic for my life, right? The eighth part of the cycle brings the new beginning of the new cycle. And so I am finishing a study. I am finishing a period of my life and beginning a brand new one. It is a pretty purely spiritual path. It is a path of discernment. It is a path of communication. It is a path of, I'm going to have to get out here and talk to people face to face and relay to them these things face to face, but this is always going to be a piece of it. As long as they allow me a platform, I am going to be here dispensing this information to as many people as I possibly can. You can find God because God will find you, regardless of where you are, regardless of what control system you believe in. And if you need him inside of that control system, he'll find you there. But if you don't need that control system, he will wreck it for you. He wrecked Christianity for me, right? It is built upon shifting sands. The entirety of the religion is based upon lies. And nothing built upon lies can be real. And that's where I'm going to wrap this one up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I have some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not something I do intentionally, but it is not something I apologize for. It is time for these things to fall away. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. And if there is a work that you would like to see me talk about in the manner that we are doing here, leave it down below. I am making a list. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I do not manifest money. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.